We have a lot to cover today. The rumor mill is really heating up as we get closer to the NHL draft. Could the Montreal Canadiens actually still acquire PLD? It sounds like they're back in the mix. We also have the updates on the Toronto Maple Leafs and possibly moving William Nylander. Could Tom Wilson end up with the Ottawa Senators? Would Alex Debrincat most likely end up in Detroit? And what's going on with the Tony DeAngelo trade and the other deals out of Philadelphia? We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a ton of rumors and lots of updates to get into today. But before we get into that, we do have a few other updates. And I actually want to start with some unfortunate, sad news. Longtime Anaheim Duck goalie coach Sudarshan Maharaj, actually was by Sudsy, is his nickname, a well-liked individual, been around the game a long time. Is going to be away from the Ducks for an extended time due to being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. So he's going to be away doing treatment, but has full intentions on winning the battle and coming back to fulfill his duties with the Ducks. So I know I don't know a lot about him myself, but I know a lot of well-known NHL coaches, players, media commented today about the news here on Sudsy, and all have had nothing but fantastic things to say about how good of a person and coach he is. So certainly I want to wish him the best in his battle here. It's certainly a scary thing, the C word of any kind, but pancreatic cancer certainly is not, certainly one of the scarier ones, we should say. So ultimately, I hope he makes out fine and wins his battle. And I hope he kicks cancer's butt for sure. On to the news. The Buffalo Sabres have signed pending RFA Jeremy Davies. He gets a 1-year, 2-way contract to remain with the Sabres, most likely going to be a member of their American Hockey League team. Of course, we had a trade earlier today between the Bruins and the Blackhawks, sending Taylor Hall and pending UFA Nick Foligno to Chicago in exchange for a couple of prospect defensemen, including Ian Mitchell. Obviously, that was a cap dump by the Bruins. The Blackhawks, of course, are not even on the cap floor yet, have all kinds of space. One of the few teams who can actually take on salary. You would have thought a Taylor Hall trade would have given a better return, but ultimately the Bruins really weren't in a position to take money back since they're trying to free up space. And they get themselves a couple of, in my opinion, decent, promising young defensemen. I mean, they're getting at a point in their prospect lives, I guess, where they're kind of older prospects, but around the league a few years. One thing I didn't realize at the time when I made the trade video is I mentioned that Ian Mitchell was a promising prospect who came out of the University of Denver. And I didn't even remember at the time, which I remember later, that Bruins head coach Jim Montgomery was his coach there. That's where Monty put in his time before getting into the NHL. So certainly that will be good for Mitchell in that sense, to get back to a coach that he's very familiar with and have a little success with. So obviously that's another connection there. I think it'll be a great deal for the Blackhawks. Taylor Hall should be a good model for Connor Bedard. He knows what it's like to be a first overall pick. He knows what the pressure is like. He can certainly, be a good role model and advisor in that sense. And it'll give him a good winger to play with as well on the top line, which will be important for Bedard's early success as well. I would imagine at this point that'll help the Bruins turn, taking this newfound cap space to sign Tyler Bertuzzi. We had speculated here on the channel before, lots of reports out there that the Bruins were preferring to keep Bertuzzi over Hall, and that most likely would be a scenario we'd see. It would be a Hall trade, would free up the money to bring Bertuzzi back. So I would suspect that they're going to push hard down to get him signed. We'll see if they're successful or not. They do have other options as well, so we'll see how that all works out. I know within the Bruins world, there was another trade that actually came later. It's a small minor league trade, so I didn't want to do a separate video for it, but the Bruins have traded prospect forward Shane Bowers to the New Jersey Devils in exchange for prospect Riley Walsh. Now, both promising prospects, getting a little bit older. Bowers was actually a 2017 first-round pick of the Ottawa Senators, was traded to the Avalanche, and the trade that brought Matt Duchene to Ottawa a number of years back. Was a promising prospect. He would played some college hockey at that point, and has had a ton of injuries. This guy has had nothing but bad luck. He's actually showed very well during his early part, like when he was going to the draft combine and his draft eligible season. Did okay in college hockey, and things were trending well, but then he's just faced a ton of injuries and adversity in his life, which has kind of really stalled his development here. So hopefully things can get back on track for him. In the case of Riley Walsh, though, he's 24 years old, played 3 years at Harvard, so he was an older player coming to the pro ranks. He's a right shot defenseman, put up some pretty good offensive numbers. He's got 3 years pro now after 3 years of college. So he's a pretty, he's a prospect who's well seasoned, you could say. And his numbers in the American Hockey League as well, he's put up some pretty good offensive numbers. Like, this is a bit of a stockpiling now in the Bruins. This is the third younger prospect defenseman that the Boston Bruins have acquired today. Like I said, the 2 players coming back from Chicago, both prospect defensemen. They're not like, freshly drafted prospects. They're all guys that are, 22 to 24 range, have at least a couple pro years of experience under their belt, some of which played college hockey. And, they're needing a bit of a fresh start. So it certainly sounds like at the very least they're revamping their American Hockey League blue line and giving them some more options for call-ups. So we do know that the Bruins, of course, have been, maybe looking to make some other moves here. So I wonder if we could see another defenseman or two being moved. I know Matt Grzelcyk's name and their forward's name have been in the rumor a little bit. Grzelcyk's more so. Be interesting to see what else the Boston Bruins do. Of course, with the Flyers trade and the Blues trade, that's never been fulfilled here as of yet, but which would have sent Kevin Hayes, possibly as much as Scott Laughton and Travis Sanheim with him to St. Louis. And we don't know the full package coming back, but we do know Torrey Krug was a defenseman that was going back from St. Louis, and he's not agreed to waive his no-move clause, which is why things have been held up and the deal has not been finalized. Of course, there was some speculation the Flyers had used some of their advisors like John LeClaire and I believe even Cam Atkinson to reach out to Krug and talk to him and try to convince him to come to Philadelphia, that it was, they'd really love to have him and explain what he could do there. At this point, he still has not agreed to waive. I've seen some reporters saying they thought there was some traction on that, but I don't believe there has. Some, some reporters that have a little bit more experience of kind of pour water on and saying it doesn't sound like he has. I know Elliot Friedman, just on our NHL Network earlier today, even said it doesn't sound like it at all. Now, there's some talk that maybe the Flyers would flip him instead of keeping him, and then maybe he'd agree to waive to go to another team. And there was some talk about Boston in there, and there was some information on Twitter that apparently David Pastrnak liked and retweeted, which got a lot of people talking. Of course, we know Krug is good buddies with Pastrnak and Marchand, and I think if there was an option for him to go to Boston, he probably would waive for that. But I don't believe that's on the table. Not to say that something can't materialize, but it certainly sounds at this point that Krug is not going to proceed with the deal, and that the deal is going to have to be totally reworked in order for any of these guys to move. So I still think there's a path for Hayes to go to St. Louis, but it's going to be probably a much smaller deal instead of the big, multiplayer, 7-8 player deal that was on the table before. So we'll see. When it comes to Tony DeAngelo, another deal out of Philadelphia, going back to Carolina, that deal we talked about in the last day or so as well. What has held that up is it actually technically violates the CBA by definition, because obviously where he was in Carolina before, he was going to end up being a free agent, but they traded his signing rights to the Philadelphia Flyers. But Tony D was technically still, I believe he was an RFA when his contract expired. Now he became UFA because the Rangers got rid of him, but Carolina obviously signed him, and he was still going to end up getting a new deal. But he didn't sign his new deal with Carolina. He signed the new deal with the Philadelphia Flyers, and now about a year later, thereabouts, it's trying to be moved back with a retained salary. But in the CBA, there is a clause that says you can't trade a player back to the team that they came from with retained salary within a year. Now, this doesn't really specify if it's calendar year. Are we talking the season calendar, which technically ends June 30th, which I believe is what it is. I believe when they say calendar year, like as it goes like July 1 to June 30th, that's how all the business runs in the NHL. Technically, as of July 1, it's considered like, the next season, so to speak, because that's when contracts all start. All contracts expire June 30th. So I believe that's what's holding things up right now. So they're trying to get the NHL to approve the deal because of the language that it's not really a cap circumvention issue. Obviously, it's a case where things didn't work out in Philly. He signed his new contract with Philly as well. But we'll see. They're going to argue that if they have to wait, they can do the deal in July because it'll be long enough that it'll be past the 1 year mark and they really can't refuse the trade at that point. So it might be held up a little bit, but it's still going to happen. He'll go to Carolina with 50% retention, and go from there. But there won't be much going back to the Philadelphia Flyers. A couple of the quick notes as well. I know the Tampa Bay Lightning have hired Joel Bouchard, longtime experienced coach for their American Hockey League team in Syracuse. Obviously, there was an opening there. So Bouchard is back for us. He's coached a few other teams, including the San Diego Gulls and the Laval Rocket previously as well. The Calgary Flames, they're pushing hard to re-sign Elias Lindholm. Now, we got all these lists of players in Calgary that either want out or at least, at the very least, unsure if they're going to re-sign. So we know Toffoli asked for a trade. We know Hanifin said he's not coming back and he's likely going to be dealt. But when it comes to Backlund and Lindholm, they haven't explicitly said, I want out, trade me. They have just said that they're unclear of what they want to do moving forward, and they're not sure they're going to re-sign. They haven't said absolutely not. They haven't said trade me. So there is some hope that they might be able to figure things out with one or both players. When it comes to Lindholm, reports are that they've pushed hard. They've had lots of meetings with the agent for Lindholm, and that if they don't get him signed, it's not going to be about money. Apparently, they have a lucrative offer on the table for him. I kind of hope they don't overpay him, though. I know a lot of the analytics people feel his average annual value on an 8-year deal would be around $6.5 to $7 million. And there was some talk that he might be looking for 8+, maybe closer to 9, like something around Bo Horvat or better. And that might be a lot of money to have tied up between Lindholm, Huberdeau, Kadri, and these long-term deals in Calgary. Given where they're heading in their careers, where we could see regression. I mean, it's risky in my opinion, but that is what the report is, that they are looking hard to keep him. And if he decides to go, it's not because they didn't offer enough money. It's that he just felt it was best for his career to go to another club. And it's just that simple. But they are having conversations and making a big push here. So we'll see how that all works out. Now, one rumor that came out of Ottawa today, which was kind of caught everybody by surprise, was Jason York, a former Ottawa Senator player, longtime member of the media, currently involved with a podcast locally in Ottawa called Coming In Hot with Bobby Ryan and Brent Wallace. On the podcast episode today, York made mention that he had heard through some of his sources that the Washington Capitals were interested in working out a deal to send Tom Wilson to the Ottawa Senators. Now, he didn't specify that involved Debrincat or anybody specifically, but of course, Tom Wilson would be a tremendous addition to the Ottawa Senators. Now, earlier in the offseason, we had heard reports that Washington is likely going to try to extend Wilson, and the odds are he was going to stay with the club. Now, of course, they've made enough moves since the trade deadline to indicate that they're not really rebuilding. You're not going to see a full rebuild while Ovechkin's there, but certainly a pretty significant retool. I think that's fair to say for sure, and trying to kind of bounce back here on the fly, so to speak. I was a little surprised to hear Wilson's name. He would be a terrific fit in Ottawa. Can you imagine one shift you play against Brady Tkachuk, the next shift you throw Tom Wilson out there? Like, it would really increase some size, strength, and being difficult to play against for sure. I think a lot of teams would love to have Tom Wilson on their team. I don't know what they'd have to give up to get him in a deal if they were going to do that, of course. And secondly, Tom Wilson is 1 year away from being a UFA, so of course they'd have to talk about a contract extension. And will he want to stay in Ottawa? We don't know. He is an Ontario-born player, so it would be close to home for him. But I know all indications are he likes Washington too. So I know Pierre LeBrun took this information and kind of ran with it and checked, and he was told by the team that they were not interested in trading Wilson. But at the same time, as much as you have to kind of listen to what they're saying there, teams never come out and GMs never come out and be like, oh yeah, we talked to Ottawa about this player and da. They're not going to come out and tell you what they're doing. They're always going to downplay things. And as Elliot Friedman said, as he was told by numerous people, including when he first broke into the business, he was covering the NBA, and the Toronto Raptors GM told him, Isaiah Thomas said, around the draft, everybody lies. And I think that's a fair statement. Nobody's going to be brutally honest with you in a public forum because they don't want you to know what they're working on, because it could hamper negotiations. So it's just that simple. Although I would say at this point, it's a great idea. As a Senators fan, I'd love to see Tom Wilson in Ottawa. I have no clue what it would cost. He'd be a great addition there, but I really think it's very unlikely that it's something that we're going to see. I do believe Wilson more than likely will stay with the Capitals, but at the same time, Jason York is a guy with connections. He's a former player with the team. His brother is also part of the new ownership group, so I know he's definitely got well-placed sources within the organization. So I don't doubt what he's saying. Maybe the team was tossing around names that were interested in the player, and more so than the Capitals contacting them. So that would make more sense. But we'll see. Either way, I don't think it's going to happen, but a very interesting rumor nonetheless. When it comes to staying with Ottawa, Jeff Merrick on the latest 32 Thoughts podcast makes mention, and he said this a few other places too, that he believes that Alex Debrincat is more likely going to end up with the Red Wings. Now, that to me is not a great move from the Senators, helping a rebuilding team in their own division, who are, yes, the Senators, you could argue, are a little bit ahead of the Red Wings when it comes to rebuilding and being closer to the playoffs, but not by like a ton. It's not like they're a country mile ahead here. If they don't get the right deal in place and then get the Debrincat replaced in their lineup, Detroit could easily catch up. You know what I mean? It's not that huge of a gap between the two teams. So ultimately, I think they need to be careful here. But if you look at what the Red Wings can offer, they have the 9th overall pick in the draft. They have the 17th overall pick in the draft. You could be looking at prospect like Jonathan Berggren, maybe Dominic Kubalik, maybe a Philip Zadina. Some combination of that is likely what they would want. Hard to say exactly. And I would suspect that they may take some of those assets and flip them maybe to for a more experienced scoring winger. Maybe, like I know there was some talk about Konechny. Ottawa, of course, he played at junior hockey in Ottawa. I don't know if that's something they can pull off or not. But yeah, anyways, that's the latest intel on Debrincat, is that Detroit appears to be the one pushing the hardest and the most likely landing spot for him. So where it's a division rival, I would hope that they get maybe a bit of an overpay, because that's usually what you need to see to make a deal happen within that close in your division like that. A few other tidbits here, including Montreal and Toronto. Montreal Canadiens, the Habs are back in the mix for Pierre-Luc Dubois. Apparently, we still don't have a deal with Winnipeg and LA. I don't know if we can say anything is stalled or not, but we know some of the main pieces coming back from the Kings. And there's been mixed messages and mixed reports out there. Some have said that the Jets have given permission for Dubois and the Kings to talk contract, and others have said that they don't believe that's the case. So we don't really know where things stand in that regard, where some sources are saying yes, some are saying no. It's debatable if they have or not. But at this point, Montreal kind of probably has a good idea what the Kings are offering, and they're trying to get back in. Now, last we had heard Dubois in Montreal, the offer from the Habs was Dvorak and Anderson, and obviously there would be a pick or prospect included in that too. But Dvorak and Anderson were the main two NHL roster players going back. I mean, if you look at the Kings offer, Velarde and Iafallo, I think that the Kings have a better offer there. Velarde is a higher impact offensive player than Dvorak. He's a little younger too. Iafallo and Anderson, not, different kind of player. I'm not sure which one they like more. It kind of depends on where you think they're going to slot in your lineup, who they're going to play with and all that. But either way, I think LA has an edge when it comes to the offer. So will Montreal offer some other names in there that you may not have thought of before? I know all along the indication was out of Montreal media that the Habs were not going to overpay for Dubois when they know they can sign him as a UFA next year. But if he goes to another team and there's an 8-year deal, that's not going to happen. So obviously you have to watch the situation closely. But as much as things are trending in the Dubois to LA situation for a couple of days, now Montreal is very much back in the mix. And still believe LA to be the front runner unless the Habs change their offer. But they can certainly do that. They have some pieces there that can certainly intrigue the Jets. When it comes to the Toronto Maple Leafs, lots of talk around the future of William Nylander. Apparently, Brad Treliving has been having meetings with Louis Gross, and there's belief that he's also met with Judd Muldover, the agent for Austin Matthews. It's believed at this point Matthews is definitely going to re-sign, but doesn't feel the pressure and need to sign by July 1st, so they'll get the deal done when they get the deal done. It's likely not going to be done by July 1, or at least that's where things point to today. Maybe they get it done on June 29th or 30th, who knows? But right now, considering that there's no indication that things are close, it's difficult to say with any certainty that it would be. Of course, after the 1st, he has a no-trade clause, so he can protect himself that way. William Nylander has a modified no-trade as well. So certainly, they want to know where things are at before they lose any kind of leverage on making deals. Although the belief is that Matthews definitely wants to stay with the Leafs and will extend. So I think they're less worried about Matthews staying. It's just a matter of getting it done how long can they lock him up and for what number? Where in Nylander, I think there's some talk that maybe he most likely stays, but if they can't get a deal done, there's some uncertainty there. So essentially what the TSN insiders are saying was that at this point, they're negotiating with the Nylander and Louis Gross, and they really, even though they may not have him signed by July 1, they really need to have a good idea where things are trending in the negotiation and what he's going to want for a new contract, because they need to be able to line everything up cap-wise to make a lot of other decisions. And of course, as a modified no trade, they would lose leverage on where they could trade him to if it got to that point. So it's believed, according to Pierre LeBrun, that they are indeed having trade conversations around William Nylander. Now, this is not a proactive case of trying to move him. This is just kind of gauging the market and having some conversations so that if negotiations don't go well, they have an idea where things stand and they can, fall back to the other side. They kind of work on both sides of it at the same time. So clearly, it's a delicate situation. But I know Nick Caprios on Sportsnet made a good point as well, saying, will Nylander even sign before Matthews is done? Because he feels that Nylander's going to want to know Matthews' salary and his number and his contract before he agrees to his, so that he's, I guess, within the proper range that he feels is fair. A lot of those Leaf players we know kind of wanted to use each other's contracts as comparable. Like, well, here's how I think I compare to, Marner. Here's how I compare to Matthews. This is what I feel my number should be, etc. And, that could be a factor for sure. And if Matthews takes his time signing, that could lead to Nylander taking his time signing. And it could lead to the Leafs getting impatient and maybe pulling off a trade. You just never know. I mean, if Nylander gets to the point that he wants $10 million or something, then that's going to be a little bit too rich. And it could lead to a trade, given that Matthews' salary is likely going to jump to at least 13 or better. So that's certainly not to say they can't get good value. They're both terrific players. I think Nylander would have great trade value, but be interesting to see what they do. But the fact that trade talks are happening goes to show that they're planning for Plan B just in case. And the Leafs' first-round pick, which is quite late in the first round, is obviously up for grabs and available for trade as well. That's been known by a number of NHL insiders that they're willing to move their first-round pick if they can find a player that can jump into their lineup and help them right away. Or if they can't do that, they may look to move back in the draft because they are low on draft capital. If they move back, they can get a team moving up that gives them an extra pick that they can maybe get into the second or third round as well, since they have a lot of draft capital already moved, and get an extra asset, another prospect into their system. Wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for the Maple Leafs as well. So that is all your news and rumors for today. All kinds of stuff happening. It's going to be a busy next couple of days. The NHL awards are tonight as well. That's going to be going down here in the next hour as I record this video. Likely start by the time the video hits YouTube. And of course, the draft is just over 48 hours away. So let me know your thoughts on all the rumors and what you think we're going to see. And we're likely going to get some big trades between now and the draft time. So let me know your thoughts. We'll talk about it further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.